Perhaps she had come out for some fresh air, or perhaps she wanted to escape the suffocating conditions inside her home. But what happened was no ordinary event. Frau Trophäa stood in the street and began to move with a strange mechanical motion. She started to dance. This was no joyful dance, no festive rhythm. It was a frantic, unrestrained movement. Her feet pounded on the wooden street with a loud noise. Her arms seemed to be tied by invisible strings that controlled her. People nearby gathered, their eyes filled with wonder and fear. They tried to stop her, asking, "What happened? Why are you doing this?" Frau Trophäa could not answer. Her voice was choked. Her body simply kept dancing. She did not stop. Night fell, the moon rose, but her dance did not cease. She neither smiled nor cried, but only danced on. Her muscles screamed, her throat parched with thirst, yet her body seemed out of her own control. When the sun of the second day fell on the roofs of Strasbourg, an even more terrifying truth was revealed. More people became afflicted with the same compulsion. They began to keep pace with Frau Trophäa's dance, first a couple, then 10, then 20. Soon the main square of the city became a gathering place for frenzied dancers. They danced, but there was no joy on their faces, only terror and helplessness. The dignitaries of the city, who relied on ancient medicine and religion, were bewildered by this sight. They quickly called a meeting. Physicians examined them and declared it a problem of hot blood, an outward manifestation of excess heat inside the body. Their advice was, let them dance, do not let them stop, or the inner fire would kill them. So the authorities made a terrible decision. They erected temporary stages in the city's largest open spaces, where musicians were seated. Flutes, drums, and percussion, as if to create a cruel atmosphere for this frenzied dance. They believed that by forcing them to dance to the beat, this hot blood might exit their bodies and they would recover. Imagine that scene, the summer sun overhead, and hundreds of people, their feet bleeding, struggling to breathe, simply continuing to dance. From exhaustion, from the pain of injury, they would collapse to the ground, but in an instant someone else would take their place, or the previous dancers would rise again with a miraculous strength. This dancing craze was deadly. Historians later theorized that it might have been caused by a type of fungal poisoning, ergotism, which restricts blood supply and causes hallucinations. Or it was a mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria, born from the mental stress suppressed by the fear, famine, and poverty of the Middle Ages. But to them, these were not scientific theories. To them, it was a curse, the work of the devil. Night fell, days turned to weeks, but the dance did not stop. In the midst of this frantic dance, many people collapsed on the streets and died from heart attacks, strokes, or extreme exhaustion. Their last moments were also spent in the same unrestrained, painful rhythm of dance. The townspeople were terrified, because even beneath their own feet they felt a faint vibration of that unknown rhythm. You are now far from the crowds of Strasbourg's streets. Your mind is calm, your body is still. You are safe, just listening to the astonishing events of that time. Deeper, deeper, drifting into the realm of sleep. Deep darkness all around. The depth of the night seems to calm every commotion. Now is the time to hear those stories that rise from the dusty pages of history. The Middle Ages, a time when human minds were shrouded in mystery, and the strange behavior of nature was often considered miraculous. During that time, some stories were born that were mere superstitions or rumors to ordinary people. But when the tide of time turned history upside down, it was proven that within those imaginary stories lay the seeds of some hard, terrifying realities. Your eyelids are growing heavy. Now just focus on the rhythm of your breath. With each breath, let your body become softer, your refuge more comfortable. Tonight we will dive into the mystery of an astonishing city where ordinary people were forced to dance by a strange magic, a frenzy that could not be stopped by any command, any medicine, not even death. The city of Strasbourg. In the mid-15th century, it was a bustling city in the Holy Roman Empire. Wooden houses, narrow alleys, market clamor. Life there was tough, but vibrant. On an unbearably hot day in July, as afternoon gave way to evening, and the air was still, a common resident of Strasbourg, Frau Trophia, stepped out of her house. The first week of that frantic dance has passed. The air in Strasbourg is no longer just heavy with the smell of warm bread or leather. It's now mixed with an unsettling blend of exhaustion, fear, and suppressed screams. Frau Trophia's first step, which began as a mere mass hysteria, has now taken the form of a terrifying epidemic. The numbers are growing. Gradually, every day, more people are afflicted by the curse that compels them to dance. The city authorities, who initially thought it was a problem of hot blood and tried to solve it by playing instruments on open stages, are now completely terrified. They realize that their solution has actually fueled the fire. The rapid rhythm of the instruments, which was supposed to heal them, instead created a mental pressure on the afflicted, exhausting them faster and drawing more people into this trance. The main square of the city is no longer a market or a meeting place. It is like a temporary killing ground. Hundreds of people are dancing incessantly there. Imagine the scene. In broad daylight, as ordinary people watch from a distance with a mixture of fear and curiosity, some of them suddenly notice their toes seem to tremble on their own. A strange tension grips their shoulder muscles. People began to flee. They locked themselves in their homes, closed doors and windows, as if an invisible wave might not pull them into this trance. But the architecture of a medieval city was not such that it could be easily isolated from the outside. The source of the disease, whether mental or physical, seemed to be spreading through the air, within the crowd, or through their mutually terrified gazes. Priests came forward, declaring it directly the work of the devil. They argued that only by the grace of God could this devilish dance be stopped. They organized large public gatherings in front of the city's churches. They prayed, they chanted, they sprinkled holy water, but it had no effect. On the contrary, some people standing in front of the church, watching the prayers, also suddenly collapsed to the ground and were compelled to join the frantic dance. Religious rituals also failed. According to medieval beliefs, if even God's help did not work, it meant the danger was even deeper. This despair gripped the city with even more terror. What they were witnessing was not a familiar disease. It was a terrifying force that possessed the soul. The physicians clung to their primitive theories. They ordered the stage to be enlarged, the number of dancers to be increased. They believed that more dancing might expel the toxic heat. So the authorities were forced to forcibly bring the afflicted and push them onto the stage. This was a cruel human tragedy. Those who were still healthy were now forced to push their friends, neighbors, or relatives towards a punishment that led them to their deaths. Those who could not dance were dragged in. Those who were partially affected trembled with fear, but their bodies were drawn toward that inevitable rhythm. The dancing continued. Day and night merged. The bodies lying in the streets could no longer be quickly removed, as those spots were instantly filled with new dancers. Exhausted bodies collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Hearts stopped working. Many died from the unbearable pressure on their brains. But even death could not break the chain of this dance. The city authorities finally became terrified. They realized that this frenzy was not only making people sick, it was destroying the entire city. They finally canceled the order to play instruments. The stage was removed. When the instruments stopped, a strange peace should have fallen. But no. Silence came, yet liberation did not. The dancers still continued to dance. They propelled themselves by their own rhythm, as if a clock was installed inside their bodies, beyond anyone's external control, just ticking away with time. This is when the real disaster began. When they danced without the inspiration of the music, their movements became even more erratic, even more painful. They bumped into each other, danced over the dead bodies lying in the streets, their existence now a torment bound only by motion. Thus ended that summer in Strasbourg. Hundreds of people, controlled by some invisible force, forgetting the laws of nature, forgetting the need for sleep, just kept dancing. They proved medieval urban legends were not always figments of imagination. Sometimes they were reflections of history's most terrifying and inexplicable realities. Now, we turn our attention to an event that for centuries was considered an urban legend. Strange abnormal growths and terrifying physical transformations in the human body. Your body is becoming softer, breathing normally and deeply. The frenzy of Strasbourg is now just a distant memory. We will now step towards a new city, where fear was of a different nature, but the foundation of reality was even harder and more terrifying. We are entering those cities where it was believed that the human body could take an unnatural form beyond the will of nature or God. Our next destination is that region of medieval Europe where another name for fear was the curse of the king's touch. Although this is not an event of a single city, this trend was seen repeatedly in various cities, and behind it lay a desperate truth. People of that time believed that kings or noble persons possessed divine power. The belief that their touch could cure diseases was very common. But there was also the reverse side. Some physical deformities were directly considered by people to be the result of a divine curse passed down through generations or appearing as a consequence of some sin. We will base today's story on a specific region where this curse or physical deformity became an urban myth. That region is the royal courts of France. In France, many folk tales were prevalent about a particular type of physical problem, which gradually turned into an urban legend, especially among the nobility. It was said that a particular kind of deformity was so severe that the afflicted were ashamed to appear in public, and they were kept only in the dark of night or in the secret chambers of the castle. Common people believed that this must be the result of some sin of their ancestors, which had come down through a curse. In the heart of this legend was a terrifying silence. It was rumored that a certain royal family suffered from a hereditary disease that disfigured their faces or parts of their bodies. If an ordinary person saw this disease, they would be cursed. This folklore was so prevalent that weak-hearted people would shrink away in fear upon seeing the afflicted, some even falling ill from fright. But medieval documents and later analysis by modern medicine reveal that this curse was actually a very serious and known disease, namely tuberculosis or TB, especially a severe form that affected skin tissue, or more specifically, the earlier stages of syphilis, which could be hereditary and cause severe facial lesions. Consider in more detail. Strict secrecy was maintained within the royal family. If any physical defect of a prince or princess came to public attention, it would raise questions about the stability and legitimacy of the kingdom. Therefore, those who were afflicted with this disease, whose skin withered, whose facial structure was disfigured, or who had persistent coughing and weakness, were hidden away. This attempt to keep them secret and away from the public gave birth to the legend. When people saw that a royal person was not being brought into public, or that they died quickly, they sought the simplest explanation. This is a curse or divine punishment. They did not know that it was a serious infectious disease from which they themselves were keeping away out of fear. Documents from that era contain descriptions of some royal relatives having strange skin or ruined faces. These descriptions were so terrifying that people dismissed them as part of fairy tales. But seen through today's eyes, it is clear that this was the extreme consequence of a severe hereditary disease concealed to protect family honor. In those secret chambers where royal failures were hidden, perhaps a young woman lay for months in unbearable pain, her appearance slowly disfiguring, while outside the story circulated that she was gripped by an evil spirit or a curse. It was a terrifying myth built upon a tragic reality. The people of the Middle Ages did not know that no spirit is needed to spread disease. A simple germ is enough. Their curse stories were actually terrifying diseases and the burden of social honor that fell upon certain families. A true yet misinterpreted urban legend. Your mind is now calm and entering a deeper state. There is no curse around you, no terror hidden in secret chambers, only the breath of your own peace. We will now move on to the third legend, which will journey from the story of the curse of the French royal court to England. This legend too was once considered a fairy tale, but later its historical basis was found. We will focus on the legend of the Great Chimney Skins, or Chimney Sweep's Cancer, which highlights the terrifying reality of waste and pollution in medieval cities. For the third city or regional legend, we will now turn our attention to England, particularly to densely populated medieval cities like London. At the heart of these cities was fire, and to keep that fire burning, wood and coal were needed, which were drawn through the narrow and unsanitary chimneys of the city. For many years an unusual folk tale circulated that children or young boys who worked as chimney sweeps would have abnormally discolored skin, and a particular type of cancer would appear among them, which in the eyes of society was a mysterious curse. These children were called chimney sweeps. They were very young, as it was impossible for adults to climb up chimneys due to their larger bodies. They worked all day amidst dust, soot, ash, and toxic gases. Their work was terrifying, dangerous, and extremely filthy. People said that these children were haunted by an evil spirit, which caused their bodies to become so dirty and discolored. They were at the lowest rung of society. Their suffering was visible to all, yet people considered their plight to be part of an odd natural law or a family curse. The core of this legend was that while cleaning chimneys, they would contract a dreadful disease that caused tumors or sores to develop on their testicles, which later turned malignant. Ordinary people considered this to be cursed or the work of evil spirits, because they could not imagine that someone so young could be afflicted with a deadly disease. To them, it was an urban supernatural tale that only happened to chimney sweeps. But this tale was 100% true. Around the 17th century, when medical science began to advance somewhat, doctors noticed that a particular type of skin cancer, squamous cell carcinoma, was unusually common among chimney sweeps. They discovered that the coal dust accumulating on their skin during chimney cleaning, and particularly the carcinogenic compounds within it, caused this deadly disease due to prolonged contact with the skin. These children not only worked with dust and dirt, but they were also exposed to toxic fumes and carbon monoxide from coal, which severely damaged their internal health. Their bodies were dirty, so society's neglect of them was boundless, and consequently no one considered their illness worthy of treatment, but rather accepted it as the product of a curse. The rapid urbanization of medieval cities and the reliance on coal for fuel created such a terrifying health risk that it was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. They could not see it as a scientific cause, so it was easily turned into an urban legend that an evil force only attacked chimney sweeps. Their lives were as black as ash, and their fate was equally tragic and inevitable. This truth proves that many of the strange tales of the Middle Ages were actually reflections of a harsh reality that could not be explained due to the lack of modern medicine. This indifference and fear of people towards the most vulnerable segment of society shrouded this real truth in a dreadful myth. The smell of cold coal is now fading from your thoughts. Your body is becoming lighter. You are now just sinking into the depths of comfort. We will now delve into the fifth legend, an urban myth based on a terrifying reality of physical suffering. We will journey from the cities of England to Central Europe, where even stranger fears about the human body prevailed. The fifth legend is the tale of the mother of all tumors, which for many years was known as a curse, but in reality was the dreadful consequence of a serious disease. In medieval society, especially when people knew very little about hygiene, any abnormal growth or mass on the body was often attributed to some unholy power or witchcraft. This legend was primarily prevalent in the folklore of Germany and surrounding regions. It was said that if a woman committed a grave sin, an abnormal mass would grow in her womb, slowly increasing in size and eventually consuming her entire body. This was called the mother of all tumors. This mass would become so large that the afflicted woman could not move, and eventually the mass itself would claim her life. This story created immense moral pressure in society. Women feared any minor physical change, as it was believed that such growths were the result of sin. It was a form of social control that linked physical illness with moral transgression. But centuries later, medical science uncovered the hard truth behind this supernatural legend. This curse, or mother of all tumors, was actually a rare type of tumor called teratoma, which primarily developed in the ovaries. Teratoma is a type of tumor that can contain various cellular components of the body, such as hair, teeth, bone fragments, or even the structure of complete organs, and can grow to an unusually large size. In the Middle Ages, when these tumors grew to a massive size, women suffered from intense pain and unbearable burden. These enormous masses prevented them from moving and eventually compressed internal organs, leading to death. Since there was no treatment for this disease at that time, and its growth was so bizarre that it was impossible for ordinary people to accept it as a normal physical growth, they explained it as supernatural or a consequence of sin. Imagine a woman living with such a mass inside her body, in which things like hair and teeth are forming. things beyond the knowledge of their time. They could not see it as a germ or abnormal cell division. They saw a miraculous, curse-induced growth. For this reason, women who suffered this terrible plight received less sympathy, but rather fear and a tendency for social avoidance. Their physical tragedy became an element of moral teaching in the eyes of society. This legend teaches us how easily physical suffering and the fear of disease in the Middle Ages could give rise to social superstitions, where the lack of a scientific explanation for illness directly intertwined with questions of morality. Your body is now heavier and more relaxed. All confusion, all fear inside your head is disappearing. Only deep, steady comfort is your companion. More and more relaxed is your body. More and more relaxed is your mind. We are now ready to move on to our sixth legend, which is perhaps even more terrifying and directly related to the realities of medieval warfare.
We have moved past the tragic reality of the legend of the mother of all tumors. Now our journey turns towards the dark history of Europe, where during wars and sieges, a terrifying myth was born which was actually a cruel reflection of military strategy. The sixth legend is the silent scouting of the tunnels, which for centuries was known as the story of silent spirits roaming the tunnels beneath castles. In the Middle Ages, when a castle or fortified city was besieged, a common tactic of the enemy was to dig tunnels underground to weaken the castle's foundations or to gain direct entry. This work was extremely dangerous and required highly silent and skilled excavators. These excavators were called sapping mice or underground workers. They worked day after day in darkness so that the sound of their digging would not reach the ears of the castle guards. Legends grew around the presence of these silent scouts. It was said that if one dug near the castle at night or heard any sound near the walls, it meant that the enemies were trying to enter through underground tunnels. But since they worked so quietly that their presence was hard to detect, a kind of panic spread among the guards. They thought this silent excavation must be the work of some disembodied force seeking to bring down the castle from underground. If any excavator was caught, they would be brutally killed immediately, as they could not be trusted. This silent spirit myth was actually based on the hard, ruthless reality of military strategy. This legend created a lasting fear among the citizens of that time that danger was coming not from above, but from below, from deep within the earth. During wartime, when a castle faced a prolonged siege, the guards would interpret every slight vibration or strange sound as a signal of the enemy's approach. In many cases, enemies would deliberately create sounds deep underground or false sounds to confuse the people inside the castle and keep their valuable guards busy with unnecessary tasks. This strategic confusion turned into stories of the arrival of spirits or the devil's tunnel digging. Modern archaeology and military history have proven the truth of these events. Evidence of many secret tunnels dug around castles have been found, which enemies created to break down the stronghold. These tasks were performed with such caution that only experienced guards could detect them by seeing slight changes in the underground structure. But to ordinary people, it was a miraculous sign. The earth itself was speaking. This silent excavation was a cruel reality of medieval siege, which transformed into a ghostly myth out of fear. Each excavator was like a silent warrior, whose existence was acknowledged only through their deadly work. Your mind is now free from all military tactics and the fear of siege. The depths beneath the earth are not pulling you down. Instead, you are now resting in a calm, safe place.
We have now moved past the tragic reality of the sixth legend, the silent excavators during castle sieges, and are moving forward in search of the seventh legend. This time, our focus will be on a terrifying folk tale concerning food shortages and famine, which was actually a reflection of an extreme social and environmental crisis. The seventh legend is the tale of the beast of the dark market, or the animal of the dark market. In the Middle Ages, especially when crops failed or a city faced a prolonged siege, food shortages reached extreme levels. During these times, strange and terrifying events began to occur in the city markets, quickly giving rise to a new legend. The story went that in the dark markets of famine-stricken cities, a type of meat was sold that was neither human nor from any known animal. It was the meat of an unknown, terrifying beast. It was said that people who ate this meat would fall ill or behave abnormally. The legend of the beast of the dark market's meat became so popular that any unusual illness or death during times of famine was blamed on this unknown beast. People believed that some curse or magical influence might be disfiguring a corpse and selling its meat, or that some supernatural creature was preying before the city lit up. However, the terrifying truth hidden behind this myth was a product of medieval food insecurity and environmental disaster. The main cause was ergotism, also known as St. Anthony's fire. Ergotism is a type of poisoning that occurs when rye or other grains are contaminated by a fungus. This fungus, named Claviceps purpurea, grows on contaminated grain. In the Middle Ages, grain storage systems were poor, so fungus-infected grain often became part of the food supply. When people ate bread made from this contaminated grain, they were affected in two main ways. One, convulsive ergotism. Those affected suffered from severe convulsions, hallucinations, and mental confusion. They felt as if their bodies were burning or they were seeing something abnormal, which they attributed to the effects of eating the meat of the beast of the dark market. 2. Gangrenous ergotism. In those affected, blood circulation to the limbs decreased and the extremities would turn black, leading to decay. This could appear as if it were the result of eating the meat of a disfigured animal. Thus, the beast of the dark market was not an imaginary creature, but rather a dreadful poisoning caused by contaminated grain, which was the inevitable consequence of the dietary habits of famine-stricken people. This disease was so devastating that it killed hundreds of people and destroyed the mental and physical structure of those who survived. There was no treatment for this disease in society, so people had no choice but to create supernatural stories as its cause. This terrifying truth proves that nature's greatest curses often come from our food sources, and human ignorance gives them the guise of a fairy tale. Your body is now calm, heavy, and comfortable. No past poison or fear can touch your present peace. You are just sinking into deep sleep. We have now moved past the unchanging peace of the blood moon, where agony and suffering are obsolete. Now we embark on a journey towards the eighth legend, which illuminates a dark aspect of Europe's religious and social bigotry. The eighth legend is the tale of the cats of the blood moon. In the Middle Ages, especially during dark and superstitious times, domestic animals, particularly black cats, were considered companions of the devil or witches. This belief was so strong that whenever any mysterious or unexpected accident occurred in a town, black cats were blamed. The legend was, on a full moon night, especially when the moon appeared reddish, which was during a lunar eclipse, these cats would gather and prepare to do some evil deed. They were said to influence human souls and disturb the peace of the town. This myth was so firmly entrenched that in many places black cats were killed en masse, which was not just a superstition, but an expression of social unrest. As a result, many innocent people who kept cats also became suspects and fell prey to witch hunters. The myth of the cats of the blood moon was actually a misinterpretation of a very serious historical and ecological crisis. The real truth behind it is astonishing and terrifying. It was actually related to rats and the plague. In medieval cities, rat infestations were a serious problem. These rats were carriers of the plague-causing bacteria. But the tendency to kill black cats was a terrible misstep. When people started killing black cats based on this legend, they unknowingly accelerated the spread of the plague. Black cats were the primary predators of these rats. Killing cats led to an uncontrolled increase in the rat population, which in turn multiplied the number of plague-carrying fleas. So, the cats that were being killed, believing them to be carriers of the devil, were actually the last natural defense system for the lives of the city's people. Their unusual gathering or nocturnal roaming was nothing more than a natural hunting instinct in search of rats, which became more visible during a full moon or lunar eclipse. The people of the Middle Ages did not understand that they were unknowingly destroying a terrible ecological balance. Their religious fanaticism and unnecessary fear caused the deaths of millions of people in the cities. What they saw was a natural predator, but they labeled it a messenger of the devil. Your mind is now calm. There are no fierce spirits or curses around you. Only the silent hunt of those cats and the effort to maintain the balance of nature, which will not disturb your deep sleep. We have passed through the terrifying reality of the 9th legend, the Hungarian bloodsucker. Now we embark on a quest for the 10th legend, which was a dire consequence of medieval religion and superstition. The 10th legend is the tale of the witch who owns her child, or the witch mother and her cursed child. In the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, in many European towns, especially where social tension and disease were rampant, a particular type of myth circulated that some women would harm their own children through curses or witchcraft. These women were labeled witches, and their children were cursed from birth. The story went that these children were sickly from birth, or they were born with deformities for which their mother was blamed, because they might have made a pact with the devil to give birth. This myth created extreme moral pressure on women in society. Even a mother who gave birth to a child with a minor physical illness or birth defect easily became a suspect. This belief was so strong that in many cases both mother and child were tortured or executed. It was a kind of social purification process where any abnormality was explained as the result of supernatural forces. The hard reality behind this terrifying legend was the lack of modern obstetrics and genetic knowledge. Today we know that many types of complications can occur during pregnancy or at birth, leading to birth defects or childhood death. These causes included 1. hereditary diseases, many genetic disorders, such as certain types of physical deformities or severe congenital defects, which can be hereditary. People of the Middle Ages interpreted this genetic transmission as the influence of the devil. 2. Lack of maternal health. Malnutrition of the mother during pregnancy, infections or severe complications during childbirth. Injuries or infections during childbirth caused severe disabilities in many children, which to outward observers seemed merely the curse of the witch mother. 3. Mental stress and fear. The mental pressure placed on pregnant mothers due to the extreme fear and suspicion in society also often had physical effects on the child. Thus, the cursed child of the witch mother was actually those helpless children and mothers who suffered severe physical pain due to the lack of medical or social support. This myth was used as a tool to persecute helpless women by exploiting the moral fears of society, where the hard reality of disease was hidden behind a supernatural tale. There is no dark, unwritten parchment around you. Only the soothing close of a story is enveloping you. We have passed through the tragic myth of the 10th legend, the Witch Mother. Now our journey will take us to the mysterious world of medieval architecture and castles, where the 11th legend was born. The 11th legend is the tale of the mystery of the unfinished cathedral. Across medieval Europe, countless massive Gothic cathedrals and castles were built, works that continued for years, sometimes centuries. Among these construction projects, some structures mysteriously halted midway or remained unfinished, despite having both sufficient resources and manpower for construction. It was rumored that these churches or castles remained unfinished because the architect or builder behind them had made a terrible pact, either with the devil or they had used a magical design that was impossible for humans to complete. These stories formed around these unfinished works that on certain days, especially at night, an unusual sound could be heard near those incomplete spires or towers, which was actually the scream of the souls of workers who had died during construction, waiting to complete their unfinished work. This legend instilled in people a kind of fear and reverence for the grandeur of architecture. Behind the myth of this unfinished cathedral was also a harsh and realistic reason, deeply connected with the economic and social structure of that time. It was primarily economic collapse and structural miscalculation. In the Middle Ages, building a massive cathedral or castle was an enormous economic project. It required vast amounts of gold, silver, and laborers' wages. But the Middle Ages were an economically unstable time. It was often seen that a patron king or wealthy merchant would fall into economic crisis shortly after starting construction, or a new king would come to power and cancel the previous king's project. As a result, hundreds of workers would lose their jobs and construction would halt midway. This sudden halt was interpreted by people as a curse or magic because they could not understand that a huge structure could suddenly stop due to financial difficulties. Moreover, the knowledge of Gothic architecture at that time was limited. Many architects attempted to build sky-high spires, but their mathematical or structural knowledge was insufficient to maintain such heights. Consequently, after some towers began construction, it was found that they were losing balance or on the verge of collapsing. Correcting these mistakes was extremely expensive and time-consuming, so in many cases authorities would leave the risky part unfinished. Seeing this unfinished part, people would think some force beyond human capability had compelled this work to stop. Therefore, this legend was not the work of supernatural spirits, but rather a tragic consequence of the weakness of the medieval economy and the limitations of architectural knowledge. Every incomplete structure stands as a silent witness to the hard work, dreams, and sudden economic disasters of the people of that time. There are no unfinished structures or screaming souls around you. Only a deep, tranquil silence that descends after construction is enveloping you.
We have moved past the dreadful reality of the 10th legend, the tragic myth of the witch mother. Now our journey will take us to the dark truth of medieval medical practices, which was once known as a terrifying tale. The 12th legend is the tale of the man who swallowed the liver of the married man. In medieval rural and some urban areas, a terrifying folk tale circulated that if a man was excessively attracted to his neighbor's wife or attempted an extramarital affair, he would be forced to commit such a heinous act as punishment, which would curse him forever. The story went that as part of this punishment, he would have to eat the liver of a man who had never betrayed anyone in his life or whose marriage was sacred. After committing this abominable act, the man would become physically and mentally disfigured and be known as a terrifying beast in society. The main purpose of this legend was to uphold social morality and instill extreme fear of punishment for those who engaged in extramarital affairs. This story was so gruesome that if anyone ever unexpectedly fell ill or became mentally disturbed, they would be viewed with suspicion. Surely they were victims of this curse. However, behind this gruesome myth also lay a harsh historical truth, which was a reflection of extreme medical ignorance and the social laws of the time. The main reason was extremely severe malnutrition and specific vitamin deficiency diseases. At that time, especially during famines or after prolonged sieges, food shortages were acute. Certain dietary habits in some regions led to deficiencies in specific nutrients, notably vitamin A and vitamin D deficiency. Individuals suffering from porphyria, which we mentioned in an earlier story, or similar diseases suffered from severe anemia and physical weakness. Their skin would become abnormally pale. According to medieval folklore, it was believed that to compensate for the deficiency of an organ in the body, that organ could be eaten. This idea was prevalent as part of some primitive healing practices. When a person became weak due to extreme malnutrition or disease, they might have been fed a particular organ or meat in the hope that it would restore their health. Such attempts often led to more diseases or infections. The story of swallowing the liver of a married man was actually a form of symbolic punishment or a desperate attempt to save a person suffering from extreme malnutrition, which later transformed into a gruesome legend. This folktale was a way to maintain the moral fabric of society, where physical illness was presented as the result of moral deviation. This story proves how easily medieval people's desperate attempts to cure physical illness and their lack of knowledge could give rise to a brutal myth. Your body is now completely nourished and protected. No symbolic punishment or fear of malnutrition from this gruesome past can touch your peaceful sleep. We have moved past the dreadful reality of the 11th legend, the story of the bloodsucker resulting from malnutrition and mistaken remedies.
Now our journey will take us inside medieval settlements where a common element of daily life created a terrifying myth. The 13th legend is the tale of the mystery of the Red Rain. In the Middle Ages, especially in rural areas or small towns of Europe, when red rain fell from the sky, it was a cause for extreme terror. The belief that blood was falling from the sky quickly spread, and people saw it directly as a sign of God's wrath or an impending terrible war or plague. This red rain was often considered a precursor of a horrible war where rivers of blood would flow. This myth was so strong that whenever red rain fell, townspeople would lock themselves indoors, pray and repent for their sins. They believed this rain was an indication of some imminent terrible natural disaster descending upon them. However, this red rain was long considered a supernatural phenomenon. Historical and scientific inquiry has found a clear and realistic reason behind this legend too, which is natural elements mixed with weather conditions. The main cause was Saharan dust storms. In the Middle Ages, when powerful dust storms arose in the Sahara Desert, those fine reddish sand particles would float in the upper atmosphere and travel hundreds of miles away to the skies of Europe. When these dust particles mixed with clouds and rain fell, the raindrops would take on a red or orange color. This phenomenon is called dust rain or blood rain. Due to the lack of technology and scientific knowledge, people could not explain this weather phenomenon. To them, there was no alternative explanation other than blood falling from the sky. Since this red rain often appeared just before bad times like famine or war, because natural disasters could be interconnected, people's belief became even stronger that it was indeed an ominous message. This legend proves how nature sometimes produces events that are beyond the comprehension of ordinary people, and how those inexplicable events over time can turn into the most terrifying folk tales. Your mind is now free from all fears of the past. Not blood from the sky, but deep tranquility and comfort are descending upon you.
We have unveiled the natural cause behind the 13th legend, the mystery of the red rain, and now we will move forward in search of the 14th legend. This legend is related to a strange social custom of medieval cities, which for many years was known as witchcraft. The 14th legend is the tale of the lady who wore the crown of thorns. In devout medieval society, especially during religious festivals or public gatherings, some women voluntarily or by compulsion wore a type of symbolic attire. It was rumored that some women, especially those who claimed to be excessively pious, wore crowns of thorns or symbolic crowns on their heads to identify with the suffering of Jesus Christ. The story went that these women were so devout that they wanted to please God by inflicting pain upon their bodies. Many of these women were revered as saints or overly pious in the eyes of society, but many also suspected their strange behavior as another form of witchcraft. This legend created a kind of duality in society. On one hand, devotion and worship; on the other, suspicion and fear. The hard truth behind the myth of the lady who wore the crown of thorns was a combination of severe mental illness and physical abuse, self-flagellation or self-harm of the medieval era. Firstly, some women, under the influence of deep religious feelings, voluntarily inflicted pain upon themselves, self-flagellation, which was a form of extreme display of devotion. But when this behavior crossed limits and created marks or wounds on their heads, it could be considered divine signs in the eyes of society. Secondly, and more terrifyingly,
it was a misinterpretation of some severe mental illnesses. Especially in extreme situations of clinical depression or psychosis, some people suffered from terrible delusions. They might have felt that they were truly suffering or receiving some divine instruction. In this state, they would inflict physical harm upon themselves or wear objects that caused them pain. Thirdly, some documents show that to maintain extreme control over society, some religious groups encouraged or enforced such rituals where women had to endure this symbolic suffering. This pressure often took the form of physical injury. Therefore, the lady who wore the crown of thorns was not a saint, but rather likely a person who was a victim of unbearable mental suffering imposed by society, religion, and their own body. Her crown of thorns was a silent expression of her physical pain and mental illness, which society misinterpreted by labeling her divine or demonic. Your mind is now free from all religious fear and social pressure. There is no crown of thorns on your head, only the soft feeling of comfort, a soft touch that provides peace and comfort.
We are almost at the end. We have moved past the 14th legend, the tragic social and psychological aspects of the lady who wore the crown of thorns. Now our journey will take us to the heart of the medieval city, where we will confront a terrifying myth intertwined with the legal system and public executions. The 15th and final legend is the tale of the hanging tree of the guillotine, or the executioner's gallows tree. In medieval and early modern European cities, when a person was sentenced to death for a serious crime, they were often publicly hanged in the main square or a place of public gathering. According to legend, if there was a tree at or near the site where the execution was carried out, that tree would become cursed. It was said that the torment of the souls hanging from that tree imbued it with a kind of supernatural power. Standing in the shadow of this tree would instill a deep fear in people's minds, and some claimed they could hear the whispers of the dead around the tree at night. These trees were called gallows trees, serving as a symbol of social justice and fear. People believed that this tree survived by absorbing the energy of its executed souls. The grim historical reality hidden behind the myth of the curse of the hanging tree was the impact of public execution sites. 1. Psychological impact. The primary purpose of public executions was to instill extreme fear in the populace, deterring them from crime. Witnessing hundreds of people hanging on the gallows naturally created a terrifying landmark in those places. Seeing scenes of death repeatedly in the same location over the years fostered a kind of dread and superstition towards that place in people's minds. 2. Symbolic importance of the site. A place where blood was shed, where human souls took their last breath, would naturally be marked as an unholy or ominous sight in the eyes of society. Trees or structures would become symbols of that place. 3. Physical impact, though not the primary reason. Ropes were often tied to trees during executions. Sometimes the remains of hanged bodies were left at the site for a long time. These organic elements, mixing with the soil, could also have an environmental impact on the site, which would later reinforce supernatural beliefs. This legend proves how the brutality of the legal framework in the Middle Ages used elements of nature to create a terrifying social symbol. Those trees were not actually inhabited by cursed souls, but rather stood as silent monuments to humanity's collective fear, torment, and brutality. There is no shadow of a gallows tree around you, no whispers of souls, only a deep, calm,
of comforting sensation. You are now rising above all the terrifying realities of history, sinking into a profound sleep. We have delved into a total of 15 medieval urban legends, which once seemed like fairy tales, but behind each story lay a difficult, often tragic, historical reality. Now, after all the stories have ended, it's time to bring your mind back to peace once more. Your body is now fully merged with the bed, every muscle relaxed, every nerve calm. Your breathing is now deep and slow, as it should be just before sleep. The horrors of the Middle Ages, the pain, the misunderstandings, everything has sunk deep into the past. Look back. You have passed through the mysterious mask of the plague doctor, which was actually a last attempt to save lives. You have passed through the terrifying mental illness hidden behind the werewolf effect. You have passed through the frenzy of hundreds of people forced to dance. You have seen physical curses caused by malnutrition, and you have witnessed sky-high architecture left incomplete due to economic crisis. All these stories remind you how terrifying ignorance can be, and how people, fearing inexplicable events, build societies based on them. But now, in this darkness, there is no place for that fear. Your mind is now floating in a clear, calm place. No sounds, no pressure, no thoughts, just one feeling, deep, unconditional comfort. The air around you is cool and soothing. Your heartbeat is now slow and rhythmic, like a calm river. With every second, you are sinking deeper. Your brain is resting. Your soul is calming. If any thought returns, see it just like these stories, a fleeting idea that will fade before it can touch you. Drift into deep sleep. Rest in peace. Good night.